The history of the Vietnam War is filled with stories of bloodshed, war crimes, and several alleged cases of human rights violations. The war, which claimed the lives of millions, including soldiers and civilians, opened up the world to a level of cruelty that has not been experienced in times past. Today we take a trip back to a time when human morality was at its lowest as we examine the unsettling occurrences that set the Vietnam War apart as one of the most horrifying conflicts in history. From the devastating effects of Agent Orange on the Vietnamese landscape to the jarring details of mass genocide, here are 15 creepy things that were normal during the Vietnam War. Number 15. Agent Orange. The Vietnam War featured the ruthless use of chemical weapons, which produced devastating effects on both the landscape and the inhabitants of the affected areas. Operation Ranch Hand, a deadly chemical attack campaign on the territories under the control of the North Vietnamese Army, led to the release of over 20 million gallons of various herbicides over the regions of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos between 1961 and 1971. One of such chemical weapons is the infamous Agent Orange, a powerful herbicide used by United States forces in order to eliminate the forest cover, which served as a safe haven for the Viet Cong troops. Outnumbered and outgunned, the North Vietnamese guerrilla forces relied heavily on the familiar terrains of the Vietnamese jungle to compensate for the lack of advanced firepower available to their adversary. The dense jungle also provided adequate hiding spots for the Viet Cong, who were very versed in the act of camouflage and their amazing ability to blend in with nature, making them almost undetectable for American forces. The Viet Cong were so successful in their jungle campaign that the American military launched a campaign against nature in order to flush out their crafty adversaries. Beyond the extreme devastation to nature, the use of Agent Orange caused serious health issues to both civilians and military personnel. The adverse effects of Agent Orange range from physical health issues like cancer, unusual birth defects, and several severe psychological and neurological problems. During the war, it was not an uncommon sight to see U.S. aircrafts dousing roads, canals, rivers, rice paddies, and farmlands with this powerful herbicide. The long-lasting effects of Agent Orange echoes even after many years since the end of the war. This serves as a testament to the gruesome nature of the conflict and the lengths at which humans are willing to go in order to prevail over their adversaries. Number 14. The missing prisoners of war. The conflict in Vietnam was marred with cover-ups and unresolved cases of missing persons, especially members of both the American and Vietnamese troops. After the Paris peace accords made between Vietnam and the American government, which signaled the end of the war, over 591 United States prisoners of war were freed and returned to their homeland in an operation known as Operation Homecoming. Although over 2,500 American soldiers were listed as prisoners of war or missing in action, only about 1,200 were reported to have been casualties of the war, with no bodies recovered. The fate of these men, who risked life and limb in the service of their dear country, remains an unsolved mystery. Speculations abound about the location and state of these missing service members, and many claim that these soldiers were kept as live prisoners by the communist forces even after the end of the war. Such unexplained cases of missing soldiers were not unusual during the Vietnam War, a creepy reminder of the risks faced by American troops as they ventured into uncharted territories in the service of their country. According to reports by many activist groups, the United States government staged a massive cover-up to draw the curtain behind the fact that many soldiers were left behind at the end of the war at the hands of ruthless North Vietnamese soldiers, their existence wiped from the face of the earth. Although authorities continue to debunk these claims, eyewitness accounts and reported data stands in stark contrast to their claims of innocence. Number 13. The creepy use of insects as weapons of war. The Vietnam War featured one of the most diverse cases of man's attempt to weaponize nature. During the war, attacks were not only anticipated from barrels, bombs, and guns, but from even the ground troops walked on. As part of the guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong, insects were used in attacks against the American forces to inflict both physical and psychological harm. These guerrilla fighters planted booby traps filled with scorpions, spiders, ants, and rats as a deterrent to American troops in order to deter them from exploring the tunnels, which served as a safe haven for the North Vietnamese troops. The Asian giant honeybee, one of the most ferocious stinging insect, was a major feature in the war, as the Viet Cong were known to attach explosives to beehives, which are then detonated as the American forces approach the booby traps, sending the stinging bees into a frenzied attack. This creepy strategy served as a two-edged sword, dealing both physical injuries on the troops as well as untold effects on their psyche. The trepidation associated with anticipating an attack from the forces of nature left psychological scars on many veterans who bear stories of horrific experiences with these weaponized insects. While cases like these are unusual in most conflicts, this form of attack was the norm during the conflict, exemplifying the gruesome nature of the Vietnam War. Number 12. The booby traps of the Viet Cong. Traversing through the Vietnam jungle was a perilous adventure during the war, as the entire landscape was littered with booby traps set by the Viet Cong as part of their most effective attack strategies against the U.S. forces. These booby traps served as part of the brilliant guerrilla tactics employed by the Viet Cong as a way of usurping the military advancement they lacked in comparison with their adversaries. The traps used by the Viet Cong include the punji stakes, which were sharpened bamboo sticks or wood, strategically placed in the ground and well camouflaged. When an unsuspecting American soldier steps on the punji stakes, the piercing edge tears through the safety boots, sinking into the flesh of the unlucky soldier. Other booby traps include grenades in a can, bouncing betties, snake pits, among others. During the war, simple patrols can lead to terrible experiences, as troops have to watch out for attacks, not just from the enemy forces, but also from traps perfectly hidden under the guise of natural elements. This creepy battle strategy, though crude, was very effective in neutralizing enemy forces, setting up ambushes and demoralizing troops. The psychological effects of constantly being on the lookout for danger does even more damage than the physical injuries inflicted by exposure to these traps. Number 11. Hunger as a weapon of war. Food insecurity was a major feature of the Vietnam War, a result of an intentional attack by the American forces on the agricultural sector of the country, as a means of beating the North Vietnamese soldiers into submission and surrender. With the use of Agent Orange, many booming farmlands were transformed into barren landscapes at the hand of the Perilous herbicide. American forces also employed the use of pests, which ravaged the crop, leading to low harvest and decreased productivity in the conflict-ridden zones. Using food insecurity as a war strategy has long been condemned by human rights activists, as the biting effects of this scarcity affects not only the military but civilians who are caught between the crossfire and suffer the most from the effects of these attacks on the agricultural sector. Although Vietnam is one of Asia's most fertile lands, with many rice fields and vast fertile lands, the people of Vietnam have experienced several severe hunger crises in the past century. This can be traced largely to the war, as many agents used in achieving the deforestation of the Vietnam jungle have transgenerational effects and linger in the soil, ensuring that the agricultural yield of Vietnam remains altered for many years to come. Due to this widespread starvation, over 500,000 people lost their lives, adding to the list of indirect casualties of the war. Number 10. Orphaned children of war. Children are always the most affected by armed conflicts, as they are practically unable to protect themselves from the direct and indirect effects of war on their well-being and development. The Vietnam War created a massive orphan crisis, which still permeates the country till today. It is estimated that there were 879,000 orphans as a result of the war, with only 20,000 of them receiving support from the government and private relief agencies. Most of these children, who have lost their parents to unfortunate circumstances, end up on the streets, begging, taking petty jobs, and sometimes even resorting to crimes like pickpocketing and robbery in some cases. Some of these orphans are children of Vietnamese soldiers who are left alone as their parents become unnecessary casualties of an avoidable war. Others include children born from the union of American soldiers and Vietnamese mothers. These half-breeds are considered products of a shameful act and treated as second-class citizens of the country. During the period when war was ravaging the land, it was not an uncommon sight to find babies dumped in trash cans or left at the doors of orphanages. Creepy scenes such as these stand as the testament to the great departure from normalcy, which was a common feature of the war. Children who should be given first priority were pushed to the sidelines, and many of them ended up facing some of the worst circumstances possible. Number 9. The Tiger Cage. Located on an island off the coast of Vietnam, Con Son Prison stands as a testament to the horrifying history of the Vietnam War. War prisoners who are unlucky enough to find themselves within the walls of this Con Son prison were subjected to some of the most inhumane conditions. The most notorious of these conditions are the tiger cages, which were a prevalent feature in many prisons within the region. A tiger cage is a pit-like recessed concrete box, measuring just 6 to 9 feet, too low for an average human to be able to stand up. In these hellholes, prisoners faced brutal tortures, in addition to exposure to pests, diseases, malnutrition, and extreme demoralization. These unusual incarceration centers were built in the 1960s, funded and aided by the United States government, as a means of helping the country curb rebellion. In this time and age, these inhumane prisons have become a thing of the past due to extreme criticism and protests by human rights activists against the unfair treatment of war prisoners. However, at the time, conditions like these were normal, bearing testimony to the extreme desensitization caused by the terrible war. Number 8. Napalm. There is rarely any image from the Vietnam War as moving as the Napalm Girl image. The image, which captures several civilians and military personnel attempting to escape the searing heat of a napalm bomb that just exploded behind them, sparked reactions internationally, as many began to call for the end of military actions in Vietnam. The image featured a young naked girl whose clothes had been burned off by the horrifying liquid fire. Introduced during the First World War, napalm was one of the most unsettling weapons used by the American forces during the Vietnam War. This wonder fix featured a mix of naphthenic and palmitic acids added to gasoline, which provided devastating results every time it was used. United States bombers aircrafts often dropped napalm bombs on territories suspected to be harboring North Vietnamese forces, burning every structure to the ground with such an intensity that has not been replicated in any other weapon. This extraordinary fire caused severe, painful burns all over the body, which are far worse than ones caused by normal fire injuries. As napalm contacts the human skin, it sticks immediately and begins to melt the flesh. This fire cannot be put out except by smothering, which also causes unimaginable pain. Apart from being used on military targets, this unusual weapon was also used to clear forests, which served as cover for the Viet Cong, and in attacks against rice fields and other farms. While the international community frowns upon the use of napalm in armed conflicts nowadays, this debilitating weapon was a normal feature in the arsenal of the United States military during the Vietnam War. It is estimated that almost 400,000 tons of napalm were used in the Vietnam War between 1963 and 1973. Number 7. Creepy souvenirs of the Tiger Force. The Tiger Force was a long-range reconnaissance patrol unit which fought in the Vietnam War from 1965 to 1967. However, beyond the exploits wrought by this elite team of American soldiers, what made them famous was the various allegations of extensive war crimes leveled against them. There are several accounts of torture, abuse, and even murder of civilians by the Tiger Force. This team, which was built in order to counter the brutality of the guerrilla forces of North Vietnam, took matters into their own hands, turning on the civilians who inhabit the territories they captured. Some horrifying war crimes allegedly committed by the Tiger Force include the routine torture and execution of prisoners, the intentional killing of unarmed Vietnamese villagers, including women, children, and the elderly. Even more creepy are reports of the Tiger Force cutting off and collecting ears of murdered civilians and soldiers, which they wore as necklaces. This reveals the extent of the cruelty perpetrated by the American forces during the conflict, in an unnecessary display of superiority and military prowess. Number 6. The My Lai massacre. The Vietnam War is ridden with war crimes and human rights violations, many of which go untried and unpunished. One of such horrifying incidents was perpetrated by personnel of the United States Army on March 16, 1968, against unarmed civilians in the Son Tin district of South Vietnam. The accounts of this incident are sketchy. However, according to official reports, between 347 and 504 civilians were murdered by United States soldiers from Company C, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, along with troops from the Company B, 4th Battalion, 3rd Infantry Regiment, 11th Brigade, 23rd Infantry Division. Some of these victims include women who were subjected to untold carnal abuse, forcible intercourse, body mutilation, and many more horrific acts. There were also accounts of soldiers raping children as young as 12 years old. This level of cruelty chills war historians to the bone, as it reveals firsthand the level of cruelty humans are capable of in times of conflict. The My Lai massacre has been considered the largest publicized massacre of civilians by United States forces in the 20th century. Dead bodies littered the streets, and shallow graves which bore testimony to the horrors witnessed by the civilians during the Vietnam War. News of the massacre sparked global outrage in November 1969, giving rise to several domestic opposition to the involvement of the United States in the war. Now it's time for today's subscribers pick. Over 165,000 American women served in the military during the Vietnam War, and 11,000 on the Vietnam side. These extraordinary women, many of whom were volunteer nurses, risked everything in order to cater to the health and well-being of the troops. Although 90% of the women served in non-combatant roles, many of them also participated in the fighting, picking up arms in a display of nationalistic fervor as they defended their territories to their last breath. Today we remember them and the immense sacrifices they made, both on and off the battlefield. Drop a comment to say a big thank you to our troops who keep us safe both home and abroad. Number 5. Fragging. Prior to the Vietnam War, attacks against the United States military officers were very uncommon, with only one of such incidents leading to court-martial. Fragging. The act of assaulting a superior military officer using a fragmentation grenade was a common occurrence during the Vietnam War, with over 730 of such incidents reported between 1969 and 1971. This figure, however, rose drastically from 1 incident per 3,300 soldiers to 1 per 572 in 1971. This level of fragging is much higher than usual and depicts the level of disorder that pervaded the United States military during the war. The very idea of a U.S. soldier rebelling against or even murdering a superior shows a sharp departure from normalcy. The U.S. Armed Force is reputed for its order, loyalty, and patriotism. However, these virtues lost their meaning during the Vietnam War, leading to a level of disorder and degeneration that has not been observed in the United States military at any point in history. These cases of fragging usually result from discontent with superiors and their orders, which might not be well thought out, putting the troops at risk. Fragging can also be a result of mental health issues faced by the American soldiers on the front line. Some soldiers suffer extreme psychological deficiencies due to the horrors they've experienced during the war, which has hampered the state of their mental health. Many squad leaders lost their lives at the hands of their own comrades, victims of friendly fire, which was a very unusual occurrence in the United States Army. Few of these fragging cases went to trial. Therefore, it is practically impossible to ascertain how prevalent such occurrences were at the time. Soldiers faced extreme demoralization. They're constantly put in harm's way, and when they reach their wits' end, they rebel against their superiors, leading to these dramatic occurrences. Number 4. The jungle battles. Perhaps the most impressive feature of the Vietnam War was the effective guerrilla tactics used by the Viet Cong, who were able to deal heavy blows on the American forces while possessing lesser firepower and fewer men. The Vietnam jungle witnessed some of the most intense fighting during the war, standing as the playground where the Viet Cong manifested their art of crude and savage warfare tactics. These thick, dense jungle terrain provided the perfect cover for these guerrilla forces, making them practically undetectable to the enemy forces. The cover provided by the dense jungle vegetation plays a huge role in the surprise element, which was the secret weapon employed by the guerrilla forces. Within the familiar terrains of the jungle, the Viet Cong were able to use the brutality of nature to their advantage, employing the use of traps in order to inflict both physical and psychological torture on the opposing American forces. According to data, the Vietnam jungle was said to have witnessed more casualties than all other parts of the conflict zone, unlike other conflicts that were fought majorly with tanks, guns, and bombs. These Viet Cong were able to create an atmosphere of eerie restlessness for American soldiers on patrol, as the constant fear of ambush and the risk of triggering a booby trap occupies the minds of troops. The United States military had to undergo special training in order to be able to traverse the rugged terrains, blend into the environment, and avoid the carefully disguised traps. It is estimated that more men died at the hands of the booby traps which littered the Vietnam jungle than by the guns and the bombs. Number 3. People sniffers. Another strange and unusual feature of the Vietnam War was the use of personal detectors known as people sniffer by the U.S. Army. Because the Viet Cong were so good at hiding in plain sight, U.S. troops often faced extreme difficulties in identifying spots believed to be housing enemy soldiers. However, as a testament to the technological superiority of the United States military, these people sniffers were able to effectively detect the presence of humans in suspicious regions. Using effluents which are unique to human beings, such as those found in sweat and urine, this revolutionary technology is able to accurately detect human presence in perfectly camouflaged places. The people sniffer was developed by General Electric for the Chemical Corps of the U.S. Army and comes in 2 different versions. This includes the XM2 Personnel Detector Manpack, which is also known as the E63 Personnel Detector. The E63 is constituted of a sensor mounted in a backpack with an air intake tube on the end of a rifle. However, there was a problem with the design, as it often detects the soldier carrying it rather than the enemy. It also made a distinct sound, which betrays the element of surprise that makes such a device a necessity. On the other end, there is the XM3 Airborne Personnel Detector, which was mounted on a helicopter and functioned effectively in fishing out the location of the Viet Cong troops. Concerning effectiveness, however, some people sniffers were known to be oversensitive, often detecting civilians or animal waste. But despite its shortcomings, the people sniffer remains one of the most unusual but important tools in the armory of the United States military during the Vietnam War. Number 2. Dogs of war. Over 5,000 military dogs were deployed to the warfront of Vietnam, but unfortunately, none of them came back. The use of dogs by the American military forces dates back to over a century. These canine soldiers were effective in the detection of hidden enemy territories, booby traps, and ambush points. Countless war veterans owe their life to the sharp senses of these war dogs who scout areas for potential threats, ensuring that no surprise attacks could spring up on the troops on patrol. These dogs were an unusual feature of the war, but unfortunately every single one of them either perished in the war, was euthanized by the military, or just simply got left behind. Because dogs were considered to be excess equipment during the war, many of them were abandoned after diligently serving the motherland. Many dog handlers who had formed strong emotional bonds with their canine companions protested this regulation, and they urged Congress to change this rule that treated dogs as properties, instead of the true war veterans that they were. These dogs employ their impressive senses to detect danger before it is too late, help soldiers detect and defuse bombs and mines, serving as a critical part of the United States' success in the war. Today, these dogs have received honors for their immense service, which saved the lives of many soldiers. Memorials are built in their names, and we remember their services as some of the unsung heroes of the Vietnam War. Nowadays, service dogs of the United States military enjoy personnel benefits. However, many years ago, maltreatment, abandonment, and disregard was a common feature of the life of a service dog. Number 1. The Viet Cong tunnels. The Vietnam War featured the use of intricately designed tunnel systems that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. These tunnels served as military bases for the Viet Cong guerrilla forces, as well as a hiding place for some civilians. The tunnel system featured living quarters, underground hospitals, kitchen, supply rooms, as well as important attack and escape routes used by the Viet Cong guerrilla forces. The tunnel system was impenetrable for the American forces, who tried on countless occasions to bombard the suspected locations of the tunnel with massive firepower, all to no avail. To make this even more horrifying is the incorporation of traps, which was a common tactic used by the Viet Cong in these tunnels. Bouncing betties, punji stakes, cartridge traps, among many other traps, were set within these tunnel systems as a means of dissuading the enemy forces from venturing further into the tunnels. The tunnel in the Chu Chi district was particularly famous for being a safe haven for thousands of Viet Cong guerrilla troops and several civilians. This was until 1997, when United States troops successfully captured the tunnels after an initial failed attempt in the past year. This tunnel, an unusual feature of an unusual war, stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the marvelous nature of human imagination, and the length humans are willing to go in order to protect their lives and territories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.